Hello, today we're speaking with Lucas Moreira, CEO and co-founder of CBA Sementes. Welcome to the podcast, Lucas.
Oh, thank you, James. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you today. As I said, I'm Lucas Moreira. I'm co-founder of CBA Sementes, a Brazilian startup that plants potatoes in the air.
Fantastic. And could you tell us a little bit about, the initial decision to start CBA Sementes?
Oh, nice. When I was in my master thesis in University of São Paulo a couple of years ago, I was working in my thesis that was basically building a new kind of sensor to measure stars in plant leaves. So during this development, I find out a technology called aeroponics. It's an evolution improvement from hydroponics, which you like basically plant things in the air. You don't use like any kind of substrate to incorporate the plants. This system, this production system, it's really interesting when you think about that you can control basically everything. You control your external environment and then you control your internal environment. You create a simulation, soil simulation chamber, whereas you like provided to the plants all like nutrition and like water nutrition and everything you basically everything you could imagine to apply you can actually apply there. My graduation was engineering. I did like robotics, so what I'm expert to it's control system. So using control system and some kinds of adaptive controls, we were studying like back a couple of years ago about how to control the total environment using the sensor I was developing at that time. And what we find out together, like with the other co-founders, was that we could apply the structure I was developing for control system in aeroponics and the use of the aeroponics for seed potato production. It was like a really fresh new field of research. And after 3 years working, totally 3 years working on that behind the desk, drawings and everything else, we decided to bootstrap our MVP back in 2016 and actually starting like a fresh new production unit in São Paulo, Brazil, small city called Divinolândia. It's a countryside city with around like 10,000 inhabitants there, really small city, but with an awesome climate, the perfect environment for potato production. At least here in Brazil is the best place in Brazil to do that. And then we started exactly like that.
Understood. And so just a little bit more context about aeroponics. So in the case of potatoes, is it, when you say it's growing in air, is it resting on something? Is it hanging? Is it in a kind of a light-free box? How exactly does aeroponics work?
What we basically do, like we have plantlets. We started the system using plantlets, and those plantlets are like putting on the top of a table this table we call the simulation chamber, soil simulation chamber. And just for you to figure out, like you can imagine a stem of the plant hanging by some kind of foam, and we put that on top of a table with a hole on it, and then this is enough for the plant to set aside like just there. By the time the plant is starting growing, we start putting some hanging wires for the plant to hang itself while the plant is growing. But there is only one point of contact between the stem and the canopy of the plant through the system by this connection phone. And that's it. Like the plant, it's literally like flying there. And the root system is totally free, open space free. So this new thing like planting in the air for the potato, imagine potato is planting on soil, like on the ground. You know that, like everybody know that, and the potato plant knows that from like the past 1,000 years of like evolution. And what we basically do, we give them like a blue screen through the potato thinking system. We target the control system to provide all the needs for the plant, and the plant flying there, like the root system, without any kind of like mechanical contact with the soil. A lot of biochemistry process inside the plant, like changing simultaneously while the plant is growing. And if you think about a internal evolution thinking, like if the plant like start thinking, give that like a bug, and then the plant starts growing in a totally different way, but in a way that is good for us because the plant starts producing more, it starts producing faster. And the most important thing, the plant actually thinks that it's going to suffer from a kind of a stress that could kill the plant, but the plant actually is growing on like the best place, the best conditions as possible. But as long as the plants don't have these information, this mechanical contact information, this method with the internal control system, like plant control system, make the plants growing in a way that's really nice, and we have some benefits out of it. At the same point, when we grow the plant in this system, while we control everything surrounding the growing units, we can make it the plant really comfortable and protected from external like bugs and pests and diseases, and all of it together combined with our control system make the plants grow in a, like the best way possible for the plant.
And so the actual mechanism of getting the nutrients into those roots, though, so as the roots kind of hang down, they're not resting in any sort of liquid and they're not resting in any sort of soil. But is there some form of mist or, spray, or how exactly are the nutrients getting contact with the roots in the first place?
When we make this simulation chamber, we can't simulate soil contact. Like the idea is to do exactly the opposite. But we have to simulate the nutrition from the soil, and we have to provide this nutrition and water to the plant. So basically what we do, we combine like a mist and a spray in a source of nutrient and water for the plant. These sprays, they are spray on directly to the root system in some controlled intervals. That basically we do that when the plant needs that. So if the plant needs to eat, we give the plant the nutrition. If the plant needs to drink, we give the plant the water the plant needs by the time they need. So that's like the main difference from a hydroponics. While you are like providing like constantly the water plus the nutrients together through the like the then film, like the water film over the root system. In our case, the root system are like hanging out, flying, and then this mist and the spray with nutrition and water are like delivered to the plant only on the time the plant needs. And by doing that, we have like some sensors and all like connected to get this information. And when the plants tell us like I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, then we go there and provide that to the plant.
So that's really fascinating. And so when you mention these sensors, are they, as the plant can't speak, are they evaluating things like, the moisture density of the surface of the plant? Are they, evaluating, I don't know, electrical conductivity to see whether the plant needs minerals, or how does those sensors work?
That's an interesting question. We have some like structures combined together to collecting data. So after collecting like different amount of data from different kinds of sensors, we combine all those informations into a information that we can understand. Like as you said, plants don't speak, but they behave, and we can watch that behave and infer some ideas after like watching all those behaviors running. We can measure like kind of like temperature, moisture. We can measure some index of radiation. We measure some phenotypical information like height, leaf area, a lot of there is a combination, like more than 10 different points of information collected, and then we combine that into a structure of adaptive control system. The idea is that by understanding this behavior in a way that we can replicate this behavior in another like condition, we know exactly when and how to provide like the nutrition and water for the plants.
And you can build machine learning models of various types. And so as you hit scale across multiple crops, those can kind of inform, and you can get even better and more efficient at providing the nutrients and so on.
Yeah, this is a process of like continuous learning, both for us and for the plant. Every new cycle, it's a new data collection, and with this data collection, combine it to the previous data collections, plus some observations like human observations that are not being collected by digital sensors, we can improve, like continuous improve the control system. That's what makes us different from other like aeroponics approach, specifically speaking about seed potato production. What we see is a simple analogic control system through the use of like timers, and that's it. What we do, we give industrial approach for the farm production system. In our point of view, we don't see our system as a farm. We see that as a seed factory. So we see that as if it's a seed factory. We conduct everything there as a seed factory, but at the end of the day, it's a farm, but it's a different kind of farm. I'm not talking about like urban farming and none of those things, because we are on countryside, but we apply there some concepts that is more connected to a factory standard than a farm standard, more like that.
Interesting. And why did you pick potatoes to start with? Would this form of farming work with any crop, or are the specific attributes of potatoes that make them pretty compelling for this method?
Well, back 10 years ago, I was in South Korea during my graduation studying in KAIST in a city college, Daejeon. And there I first got contact in my life with like aeroponics, and I first got contact with aeroponics with another source of plants like lettuce, cabbage, or this kind of plants. But then I don't know how, but like internet and things, when you are like searching for things and then other things pop up, I first saw aeroponics applied to potatoes, seed potato production. At that point I never like heard about seed potato. I'm telling you that's like more than 10 years now. But I found that interesting. There were like just a few papers talking about that, most of them in biological papers, like, or agronomic papers, but none of them in engineering or control system. And like this is my passion. So when I saw a interesting technology and I didn't see anybody working with control systems applied to that, I started thinking, okay, I can do something nobody's doing now. Just after that, I started like studying potatoes and why potatoes need these improvements to like perform better, why potatoes like seed potatoes are important in potatoes productions all around the world. Like then I find out that there is a lot of problems with potato production all around the world. But the most important problem is the bad seed potato. And that was like amazing because I could never imagine that to plant a potato and harvest a potato, like the whole process, from the first seed, the very first seed, until the potato arrives in your table, it takes like 3 long years on average. Can you imagine that? Like when you get like my seed and put that on the ground and plant the potato for the first time, you don't like harvest the final potato that will be delivered to the people and you're gonna like eat or go to the factory and fry that to become like potato chips. You literally plant that and harvest another source of seed, because this potato is still a expensive potato. We produce like the very first seed. We call that generation zero, because that's the very first generation. When you plant the generation zero on the ground, you harvest a generation one, G1. And you do that again, like you plant the G1 and you harvest G2, you plant the G2, you harvest G3, and then you plant this G3. Like generally speaking, that's what's happened like in most of the countries. Then you harvest that and you have potato that's available like for like eating or processing or wherever. And the point is, all those like plants, harvest, storage, you have to like cold storage this potato. Is it like potato is a giant ball of sugar, like no more than
Sure.
that. And everybody and everything wants to eat sugar. So there are a lot of bugs, there are a lot of diseases that want to eat this giant ball of sugar. And what you do, you store a giant ball of sugar and giant refrigerators, then you bury it, a giant ball of sugar on the ground. That's not a thing that if you like starting thinking about, you can imagine that everything wants to eat that, like all kind of bugs or all kind of diseases, and they actually do. Every time you plant potatoes in open fields, you can introduce some kind of contamination, like good contamination. Like they're not like problem for people, they're a problem for the plants. Imagine that you have generation zero with no contamination, so it's 0% contamination. When you plant and you plant like in a good way, in a good environment, you do the management like in a proper management, you harvest the G1 with like 2-3% of any kind of contamination. Then you have this G1. When you plant this G1 on the fields and you harvest your G2 is not like 1-3% more contaminated. It's around like 8% contaminated. When you do that again, you plant the G2, harvest G3, you have like 15-20% of those seeds contaminated by like any kind of disease. Could be like really simple disease, like a fungus that's like that's there, like on the soil, on the air, that and it's not a real problem for the plant. But depending on the kind of disease and the kind of contamination, you start like decreasing the output while you plant and making the fields more hard to manage, because with more diseases on fields, you need like more chemicals to control, and like this process run until the time you say, oh, okay, that's too much, I need to press the reset button and need to zero seed again. So basically we produce the seed that is the reset button of potato production. And there is a study
And
from,
are you able to remove some of the generations, or is it rather that you can, because of the nature of aeroponics, remove the loss through each successive generation, and
yeah,
so
we
you're
do.
ending up with much closer to 100%?
That's one of the like really good things about the aeroponics. It's because it's a very energetic seed. Imagine that the plants don't need to expend any kind of energy to occupy a space on the ground. It's already there on the air, so they grow like freely on the air. So the potato growing in aeroponics can retain a lot of energy, and once it goes to the soil, it's a very healthy seed with a lot of energy. So it produces more and produce a plant that's more resistant to the open space. Thinking about bugs or disease that want to eat the plant or like invade the plant. If you have better health condition, you are like stronger to resist to those impacts. So when you like harvest your G1 using the G0 produced in aeroponics, you got a better G1. So instead of getting 2% of any kind of contamination, you got like 0.5%. When you go to your G2, instead of having like 8% of any kind of contamination, you got like 5, 3, 4. In this way, you are producing over the production chain a stronger production chain. Then, by doing that, if the plant is more productive by using like a better seeds, you don't need to run over like the third generation, the fourth generation. You could stop on like the second generation because you have more potatoes and at really affordable price that you could end that cycle there. So today, if you are a potato farmer, you need to have a 3.5 years forecast for your production. If you start working with like the seed producer in our system, you can reduce your forecast to 1.5, 2 years maximum. So you can save time and you can save energy by not producing like one generation more. You could stop on one generation earlier. You save energy into your potato storage, like cold storage chamber. You save time because you don't need to plant more area to get more generations. You use those areas to produce the final potato that goes to the markets. In this way, we place a really important role in sustainability for the potato production chain. Can you like figure out this? That's a good point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thinking about how you could have filled that gap, one of the things that come to me is how best to monetize something like this. Are you looking to sell those potatoes directly and be basically a provider of seed potatoes, or is it this more where you're going to kind of generate the technology and deploy that to existing seed potato growers?
That's interesting. Our business model, it's directly production. So it's a B2B model. We produce the seeds based on farmers or industries forecast through like contracts, like production contracts, and then we deliver the seed to them with our on-field support. For seed potato producers that are already produce seeds using like regular systems or traditional production systems on the ground, we could become a new supplier for them directly using the seed. But thinking about like the next like 5 years, maybe we could think about in a new business model that could include licensing the technology for different seed potato producers all around the world. That's one option, but we never like did that, at least here in Brazil. The first thing is starting expanding production, like directly delivering the seeds to then exporting the seed itself, then move to produce in other countries depending on demand. That's our business model now.
And in terms of the technology itself, once it's set up, how much specialized knowledge is needed to maintain and use it? Is this something that you need, high-end, well-trained people to manage, or is it something that, like a typical farmer could potentially use down the road?
That's a trick question because if we think about the system itself, the use of aeroponics and like everything until setup and until running some cycles, it's a complicated thing. You need to get like very specialized people working on. You need to have a good trained control system with a lot of data, a lot of information. Once it's there and it's running from a certain period of time, then that could be easier or easy to people run without knowledge because it's all concentrated into a black box control system. Thinking about this way, it's an easy thing to license and send to people like anywhere in the world. Thinking another approach without this black box, it's really hard to run. Like you can maybe replicate the mechanical conditions like the pipes, the nozzles, the simulation chamber, but without the control system and without the data behind the control system, it's really not easy to run. So even having very specialized people running without the control system, thinking about like a regular control system, analogical or digital, like both like base timers, you can't perform so good. But once you have the control system there, a totally encapsulated black box, you don't need to have people with good knowledge to run. It's just like follow the step-by-step procedures and lets the control system work alone there. That's like the two approach I can see on that.
That makes sense. And you mentioned kind of, future goals. I believe you recently raised some outside funding. What is the plan to over the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months?
We just finished our seed round, and like by the beginning of the next year we will like starting our expansion unit with this money. So what we're going to do for the next like 2 years, at least the next 2 years on our plan, is to expand and consolidate the system plus the brand plus the quality through our clients and the customers between like farmers and industries. So if we do that in the way we are designing to, by the end of the 2022, we're going to have the brand CBA Sementes well known here in Brazil, outside Brazil, well known by industries like PepsiCo, McCain, not only in Brazil but abroad. And then we will be able to maybe open a second round, like a Series A or like this kind of next set of investment rounds to expand the production, maybe more in Brazil or abroad, depending on the demand and depending on the contracts with the industries and farmers.
And that kind of go to market, how are you kind of running that? Is this, kind of an enterprise sales model where you're, getting on the phone, or somebody in your team is getting on the phone, reaching out to people, or do you have other kind of channels that you're leveraging to try and get those early users or those early, buyers, I guess, of the seed potato?
If you think about the potato market itself, at least here in Brazil, I have like few information from other countries, but at least here, the channel is the direct contact to the farmer. If you're thinking about like large farmers, medium-sized farmers, or small farmers, the approach is kind of the same. You just go there and talk directly to the farmer. When you use the industry channel, it's a little bit different because every processing unit, every processing like industry here, which will like make or French fries or crispy or like any kind of like chips. What they do, they have a set of farmers that supply them the plain potato that they will process in their processing units, and we work directly to the industries selling to them, and then they will make this distribution to their combinations of farmers. By doing that, if we contact like few industries, it's the same of contacting like a lot of farmers separately, because you talk to the whole chain instead of talking like one by one. At the same time, there are some farmers that themselves are like giant enough to like equivalent to talk like to hundreds of farmers. So here in Brazil there are like this difference between them, and the channel it's personal contact. The internet now
Hmm.
during like COVID period of time, we could find out that they are like more susceptible to be contacted by the internet now. But the channel is not the same channel as other approach, like others like agri startups approach. You go there like by Facebook and find them on groups. You go there on WhatsApp. They are like well connected to WhatsApp groups. So you try to enter in those groups and then they get in touch with you. Then you have the opportunity to talk to them later. It's different from like put an ad on Instagram. They are not there. They're not like following some Instagram profiles and do like a click on an ad on Instagram. It's different. Like the funnel for the sales is totally different from the regular digital way of thinking.
That makes sense. And I think you have a couple of family members involved in the company. I suppose could you explain a little bit about how that happened? What that's been like.
Yeah, that's nice. You're talking about like the co-founders. Like we are in three. co-founders, and we are a family too. It's me, my brother, and my father. Before I started my master's thesis, we had a construction company, just a regular construction company here in Brazil. During the period I was in my master thesis, and I figured out that we could apply what I was studying there, what I was like developing there, into a completely new business and open a startup to develop like high-end technology applying to a unknown field, at least here in Brazil, and that could be like a good idea. So I spent about 1.5 year pitching for my co-founders to convince them
Sure.
to dismantle the construction company and get the money from the construction company at that time to use and bootstrap the MVP we built in 2016 for the CBA Sementes. And then CBA Sementes was born. That's really interesting to have like co-founders as a family. There are pros and cons, of course. The pros is like you can, at least in my case, I can totally trust and both of them. That's really important. Like you can count on every single time, anytime. That's really important when you like start your startup. Like depending on your co-founder and the way you develop and the stage you are developing your startup, if you don't have this like trustability and like workforce, strong workforce together, it's a really bad thing. Maybe things could be much like worse than in a regular way, because the only truth about like starting a company, starting a startup, is that at some point there's going to be like fails, and you have to handle
Sure.
with that, and you have to like to overcome that. And your team is the most important thing. And if your team is a family, well, that's a strong thing. They have like the skills you could find on open markets, but they have another set of skills, soft skills internally, that you can count on in a way couldn't like see in other companies. That's like friends from college. That's like really common. In our case, my father had like a lot of experience, over like 40 years of experience working on construction sector here in Brazil. So a lot of skills on like business administration, sales, marketing, and financials. He's the CFO he is our CFO. And my brother, he worked with me in certain points, but he studied with me in the University of São Paulo in Brazil, and he had a lot of experience in operations and supply chain.
Hmm.
And he is our COO now. Those are the good things, like the upsides of having like family on the co-founders. The downside is you never leave the office and you never leave your
Sure.
family. So at certain point, you kind of like mix the company and the family. That's like only bad if you have a bad relationship internally in your family. In our case, it's only like upsides. That's really good. Like especially for me, when my father lost his father a couple of years ago, I was working with him in this construction company, and I felt that was really important. My presence there to support him while he had his loss. Okay, it was my grandfather, but at that point it was his father. It was stronger for him than me,
Hmm.
and support this loss was really good way to create a better connection between us. And then okay, we are a team, we are a family, we are supporting each other in a way I don't see in other teams outside. They have good relationships, but okay, they like go out, have a beer, they go out for dinner and they celebrate, but at the end of the day everybody goes to their homes and to their families. In our case, everybody goes to their home, but we are one giant family. So that's good. That's really good. I know that without this setup, probably we couldn't be now in a way we are.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. I've said before on here that I previously started a company with my brother, and it didn't work out. I mean, we're back very close again. I think there's definitely strengths in the fact that there was already, it was a different business. It was a construction business, but having that kind of basis for the translation of those relationships and those kind of roles being very defined, like you mentioned, I think is the best way to go forward. But yeah, no, Lucas, has been great. Really enjoying this chat. And so, just as we finish up here, is there anything I should have asked you about, but I did not? Is there any other questions that I didn't ask that you would like to answer?
That's a good question because as I was speaking to you before we starting recording, I'm not like familiar to podcasts and this kind of interview. That's my first time, and I'm really enjoying it. What I can see, like generally speaking about podcasts, like the small experience that I have,
Mm-hmm.
is that's really intimate. Your audience gets really connected to you, and I don't know how your audience like what they want to know, what kind of thing they want to know. So what they could think that is interesting to hear, like I really don't know, like what kind of thing they want to hear.
Well, actually, just one question I would have then is, what's Sao Paulo like? Starting a company. Everyone's very familiar with certain parts of the world, like the Silicon Valley, et cetera. But how's Sao Paulo for starting a startup?
Ah, okay, that's really good. Starting a company in São Paulo or like anywhere here in Brazil, you have to be like lunatic to do that. Open a company in Brazil, you have to be
Right.
lunatic because like I really never been there in Silicon Valley, but I have a lot of friends that did, and there is no place like Brazil to become an entrepreneur. You really must be at certain level crazy to start a business here because you have no support. You have a lot of taxes. You have a really complex tax system. You have completely like crazy law system involving any kind of business in a very different way. You have like a huge amount of different laws, and some of them are like antagonic. Like here in Brazil, especially speaking about seed potato production, we have one law that's on the chapter one says like A, and on chapter B they says like B, talking about the same thing, and A could not be B. Just for you to imagine. So you have to
Right.
interpret the law in a way that's you must be crazy to start thinking here. You have no support. Like our like financial systems only supports companies that are already big. They don't support small companies. Or it's changing. Like I can see that's changing. This week they approve a new law called Marco Legal das Startups. So it's a combination of information about startups that will create some more attractive taxes or attractive and facilitations here in Brazil to open a startup, as the government like sees that if they don't do this, we will like lose for all other countries around the world in this like technology development and entrepreneur at the same time. But when you go to people and ask them what they think about entrepreneurs here in Brazil, it's different on like United States. Like in the United States, the entrepreneurs, they are like the good guys that's starting companies, and they will like create jobs. They will develop the country and let the country go to another like high place. Here in Brazil,
Sure.
the entrepreneurs, the image they have here is that they are like the bad guys who earn money as like the like employee costs. There are a lot of like these way of thinking about entrepreneurs here in Brazil, and it's changing. That's a good thing that is changing. Like especially if you are working with technology, what's our case. But the legislation are not following at the pace and speed they need to follow the technology development. So it's hard. It's really hard to open companies here in Brazil, and it's even harder to develop and let the company be alive until it reach the point that okay, now we are good, now we're like expanding. This whole process is really painful process, and in this way it's good because you are learning too much. The downside is that you probably will fail and lost your company in like less than 2 years. Like most of the startups do that, but in a way that you can recover at least to Here, it's a lot harder to do that.
Yeah, and definitely sounds like a lot of challenges, but yeah, all the more impressive how yourself and CBA Sementes has kind of overcome those and seems to be going from strength to strength. But yeah, thanks very much. This has been a great conversation. Thank you, Lucas.
Oh, nice! I love it to talk to you, James.